Thank you, choir. Good morning, everybody. You know, on occasion, some more so than the other, we gather here on Sunday mornings, and we say the peace prayer, a peaceful mind. I'm at peace with all the situations and circumstances of my life. Peaceful heart, I'm at peace with all the people in my world. And peaceful spirit, I'm happy with myself and at peace with the life that I'm living. And there's a certain measure of serenity that comes over me when I say that. I'm sure that the same is for you. And then throughout the service, as we move into meditation, it kind of brings me back into clear focus in regards to the kind of person I want to be and how I want to live my life. But the problem is when we leave here in this sacred setting and we move out into the world where we are bombarded with all sorts of messages that are the opposite of peace and the opposite of harmony. And this isn't a political talk because it's people from every walk of life, from every political position. We're subject to the media, we're subject to harsh voices in the public. All sorts of things come into our area, our particular life, that are disturbing and that are things that make us angry and upset and anxious, but most of all, fearful. We are afraid of what might happen next. So the question that I have for you is, what can we do to find a measure of peace, a measure of harmony, in a very chaotic and sometimes confusing world? How can we immunize ourselves from that negative virus that hits and causes us to get angry or sad or even depressed at times? That's what we're going to discuss today. Now, I talked to a lot of people about this. Some say, well, I just turn everything off and I don't listen to it, and I don't read it, and I don't watch anything. And that's one approach. But I don't think that we can stick our head in the sand like an ostrich and ignore what's going on in the world, because the world needs us. It needs our consciousness. It needs our prayers. It needs our activity to engage in what we feel is the best thing for the world itself. Today I've invited 4 people to come up and talk about this very subject. How do we find peace in the midst of chaos? How do we find peace in the midst of adversity? How do we find peace in the midst of things that seem to be threatening from all over the world in regards to perhaps war that might break out or all sorts of other things? So I'd like to have them come up now. And Ron McCorkle. Ron is the creator of this service today. It was his idea, and he's also going to do the meditation. And then when he's done, Desiree, the priest, and Ace Wagner. Okay, have a chair, everybody. Yeah, let's straighten out.
Ron's staging it. He said we can't be seen behind the podiums.
Well, that's good. We have to look at Ron. Okay. So the question before us is, how do we find that measure of peace and sustain it during a time that is very chaotic and sometimes fearful? But even more so for you, Desiree, I'd like to ask the question, do you feel that social media or artificial intelligence is threatening to the peaceful nation?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Well, let me get the microphone for you.
Hi, I'm Desiree, and I'd like to start by using a quote from Mr. Rogers. As you guys know, Mr. Rogers lived in the neighborhood where the recent Tree of Life incident occurred. And his quote is, in times of trouble and turbulence, his mother used to tell him to look for the helpers. There are always helpers. And one of the things that we talk about in the subgroups, and also just generally, people are asking, is social media and the internet and artificial intelligence, what effect do they have on our well-being? Is it doing something to our brains? Well, I'm a visual learner, so I brought a visual. All right? So first of all the movies that we watch and enjoy where the AI, artificial intelligence, evolves some sort of emotion or some deep philosophical thought, it's never going to happen. It's computer science. It's mathematics. It has no organic principles. It does not think. And I guess the most important thing is it has no consciousness. And to this very day, neurologists cannot figure out what consciousness is. They can't reproduce it in a petri dish, nor can they write a mathematical question that produces consciousness. So I think we can all be pretty confident, and we can get rid of the fear that Watson is one day going to be human or superhuman. Okay, the second part, and it's real short, a little technical, is all AI is two binary components. It's prediction and it's persuasion. So what happens, it's your user habits with your internet or interactive device, from your cell phone to your desktop or whatever. Wherever you go on the internet, this mathematical formula tracks that. Okay, bundles it up, not just with you, but in what they call metadata, sells it to the highest bidder. And for example, say I like shoes. We should use Sandra, but we'll use me. Okay, say I like shoes, and I go to a shoe store 3 times a week on the internet. Okay, they're going to bundle that and say Desiree has a 30% chance of buying shoes. They're going to sell that to the highest bidder, and then they're going to come back, and then every place I go, when I go to the newspaper, it's going to be a shoe advertisement. When I go to my email, it's going to be a shoe advertisement. Everywhere you go, it's going to be a shoe advertisement, figuring that 30% of that time, I might click on one and buy some shoes. Okay? And that's when the persuasion comes in. When all this math goes to the highest bidder, and they pump it back to you, wanting you to stay in that lower consciousness. Okay, so now that we know that AI is not a boogeyman, it's just a math problem, enough of that. Let's talk about our higher selves. Thank you. The benefit is that AI can only affect your lower brain. I guess I do need a picture a minute. The red part. See that red part? That's where fear is. That's where fright or flight is. Okay? That's where depression, all those things that cause us to be stressed out all the time, is only your lower brain. So the machine can only affect that. Look at all this brain that God left you. Look at all that higher mind and higher consciousness, love and peace, and high habits like prayer and meditation. AI can't go through the door to your higher mind. Furthermore, we all know that in universe, God and the true divinity of science is God. So you know that the apple on your tree of life cannot be trespassed by machines or artificial intelligence. So it's up to each and every one of us to strive our highest, to stay in our higher mind, to get there and stay there. Right, Beth? To the best of our ability, and then push a little higher. Okay? Don't get content. Push a little higher. So last I want to say, in addition, higher mind gives us compassion, and it gives us a resting place during this time of a turbulent changing of the ages. What we need to keep in mind, as we rise to our higher self, then we can see. I mean, it looks pretty tough in our lower mind. It looks like a real rough patch. But in our higher mind, it's this too will pass, right? So we have to keep in mind that just like a baby has to crawl before it stands upright, it's the same with the changing of the ages. It's not just a new century. It's a new millennium. That's what's going on. Forget all the increments and that stuff. Don't forget it. Have compassion on it. But know that there's a place to go inside of you. And as we do that, we radiate our whole environment. We bless people without saying a word, just being in our higher mind. And so that's about where I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Ace Wagner, and I take the question seriously. And with respect to the kind of political environment, I don't think we can talk about the political environment without asking questions about the economic environment. because they're inextricably linked. And I think there's some basic unfairness that we can find in understanding that there's work to be done. So I take it seriously and do watch the news rather than turn it off, but I'm very selective. And I try to be broad about that, but I'm interested in learning as we try to uncover what's going on in our world. But I find solace by looking back and being mindful that my time here and the situations that we're facing here are what they are, but they're probably a replication of the same fear that those who went before me have fought as well. So if you've seen Hamilton, you're reminded of a couple hundred years ago where the vice president shot and killed the secretary of Treasury, and he got off scot-free. Was never charged. And while duels were outlawed at the time, it was a duel, but it's said that Hamilton pulled away from the shot, and yet he was murdered nonetheless. A few years later, there was a bit of an embroilment on whether people really should control the lives of other people and use them as assets of their business, of their economic fortune. They called it slavery. And a war ensued, not just over the fundamental human right, but also over the argument as to who should be the producer of the raw materials and who in the North took advantage of the industrialization and became the money center. And so the fight was not only about the basic human rights, but about that economic right. Roll forward a few decades from there, and a fellow writes a book. And the book's about these characters. Perhaps you've seen read the book. You've seen the movie, perhaps. I'm sure your cousin Ozzy did. It's a book about a dog and a young, attractive lady in a plaid dress. And she goes walking about through a dream to first encounter a person from the agrarian society, a straw man who apparently had no brain. Now, this was the farmer thinking in the livelihood of that period being belittled by not having a brain or basic human intelligence. As they went on down the path, they found a fellow who couldn't move well and had kind of rusted in place, a representative of the industrialized society, of robots, of the idea that people aren't human but rather just there to produce goods. And she went on down the road to find a coward representing society at large, those who don't speak up for the betterment and for the common spirit of our humanity, frustrated and flustered with how to act in such a world. And finally, they end up in front of a rather bombastic, smoke-filled, noisy character in charge of all and giving vision, supposedly, but really dictating the world and its local government, only to be uncovered. Now, in the end, each of them found that they already had a brain and a heart and the courage to stand up. And she, too, the young woman, realized that with these shoes, these slippers that she had, she could return to from whence she came, our original selves, the selves that we brought into this world before it's been confounded with our human life, our economic and political battles, and the fear that we engender in one another. And she found that by clicking those heels together, she could move beyond that fear. And I submit to you that we each have our slippers. We came with them. We simply have to be mindful that we have the opportunity to rise above the muck and mire of the noise of the day and to understand and believe and grasp the fundamental truth that we're all of God's Spirit and we're all co-creators in this world of ours. So my slippers show up on Sunday morning, meeting with you, listening to the brilliant music and the speakers, and taking a quiet moment. Another of my slippers, my metaphorical slippers, is working with a book called The Course in Miracles, which very much puts this very concept that I'm relating in our face, to be mindful so that we are mindful of the very slippers that we have. We're mindful of the truth within rather than the fear. And so with those thoughts, I ask you to, one, identify your slippers, and two, be mindful that you have them available to you at every turn. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Winnie Dunn. Apparently the women on the panel are both interested in brains, because I have a brain thing to talk about too. One of the things that has been interesting to me in this turmoil of the days that we're in is in the study of neuroscience, one of the sort of paradoxes of the brain is that the brain is always seeking homeostasis. It's always seeking to be calm and peaceful and familiar and predictable. And yet, the brain doesn't learn unless it's disrupted. When homeostasis is disrupted, that's when the brain activates to learn something. I want you to think about a time when you took a test in college or high school, and I'm betting that every one of you could tell me about a question you missed, but you probably don't remember all the ones you got right. You got some of them right because you knew stuff, and you got some of them right by luck or accident. But the truth is that our brains activate and gear up when things are in an unpredictable or unsteady state. And that gives me a little bit of comfort about the tumultuous time that we have the privilege of living in right now. We have the opportunity to ask ourselves, what next? What do we want to be? And so when I get frightened and distraught and upset, I go back to that little fact that this is what it takes for things to change. This is what it takes for things to get better. The unfortunate truth is we don't act when things are in homeostasis. We kind of try to coast. And you know, one of the things that these tumultuous times have done is activate people. I watch people that have never voted vote. I watch people that have never done anything political or civic or cultural that are doing things today. So we can't curse the tumultuousness without recognizing the blessing that comes when we see the opportunity to be better, to be different. And it takes action, like you guys have been talking about. So one of the strategies that I use is I think about the fact that we're in a period where I observe a lot of people wanting to be right. I have some right fighters in my family. And you know, there's very few times in the world when being right is satisfying or even helpful. Sometimes I think that what people want is to be heard. And the opportunity that we have as people that come to Unity is to just pause and listen to them. I don't agree with everyone, but I am curious about how they have the opinions and views that they have. You know, I'm clear with people about what I believe, but I also want to be a person that's willing to hold a space, because it's just like at home, you know, like if you get aggravated that your family members put the toilet paper on upside down, you know, like, why don't they just put it on right side up? You know, it's not about the toilet paper, you know, because when you're in a prosperous state, you go, oh, well, you know, it's just how he is. And when you're in a weak period, you get aggravated. So it's the same thing. Like, if we want to know what's going on, we have to find out what's underneath. And I think what's underneath is there are people that have felt disenfranchised and not heard, and we need to find a way to give them a place to speak. You know, I was a leader in a big program for a long time, and lots of times we couldn't do anything to change what was going on, but just letting people speak about how frustrated they were or how upset they were about what was going on, even if we couldn't change it, just that dialed it down. Just that made it easier for people to move forward and sort of take in the next thing and go on. I've been fascinated by what drives people, and we don't find that out by just listening to the shallow rhetoric. We only find it out by waiting. You know, people are hurt. They're disenfranchised. They're fearful. They feel that no one understands them. And when we pause, like we all learn here in Unity, we give people the opportunity to just be heard. Even if the same thing's going to happen tomorrow, it will dial down the rhetoric. So that's my part of the
Thank you.
story.
Well, I guess you can tell that from the previous conversations that we're talking really about feelings, nothing more than feelings. Oh, that happens every time I get a mic in my hand.
Keep going.
Anyway, this thing about feelings is that we all have them, but they're all different. Feelings come from a place within us that is directly related to the fear that we perceive the outside stimulus has produced for us. So we either choose to react to that feeling or we can turn away from that feeling. Now, my thing is that this idea that you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm never wrong, gets us into a lot of trouble with feelings, because feelings can be very, very deep within us, and we have to remember that when we react to those feelings, the words that we say based on the fear that we perceive is very hard to take back. So, when we talk about feelings, we want to be aware of where are these feelings coming from? What is triggering those feelings? And what can I do to react, hopefully proactively, to those feelings without hurting someone else's feelings, and most importantly, being able to hang on to mine because they belong to me. So, when somebody comes up to you and starts to talk about the way you should be feeling, we must remember that that's their perception of how you should be feeling. It's not how I'm exactly feeling myself, but they are entitled to perceive whatever they want. My job is to listen to it, decide whether or not I want to react to it, and most importantly, understand that it's their feelings. You've heard that thing about what you think about me is none of my business? Okay, we have to kind of take that in as truth for ourselves, because we are not in control of anybody else other than ourselves. We can't control other people's thoughts. We can't control other people's feelings. And most importantly, we have to understand that there are some things that we can't even control ourselves. This is where we get into the problem or the situation where we have to be able to understand that sometimes we have to agree to disagree. And if we can't agree to disagree, then sometimes it's best to just keep our thoughts and our feelings to ourselves and keep our mouths shut. The idea is we want to provide an atmosphere of peace and harmony amongst those that we are with. We have to respect other people's feelings, hoping that they will respect ours. And again, even if they don't respect our feelings, we have to remember that's their perception about us. We are in control of what we do, what we say, how we act, how we respond. So with that in mind, I would just like for us to take this idea into your head that the way that we feel about anything is really up to us. We can't let outside influences determine how we feel, because everybody has their own outside influence upon us. And remember, everybody is always right. But you also have to remember that while they're also right, you're also right. And none of us are never wrong. So as we go into this time of upset within our nation, within our communities, within close-knit groups, there's always going to be some differences. There's always going to be someone who takes the stand that this is the way it should be, and I'm not going to hear anything else. So you may as well not even talk to me. And that's okay. Why? Because the way they feel is up to them, and we have to respect that and allow them to be with their own feelings. So as we move into meditation time, we're going to explore some things that you might think about in regards to how you feel, how you are in control of your feelings, and how you don't have to be in control of anybody else's, because you can't. And hopefully that will give us an idea of how we can come to that peaceful self, that peaceful part of us that allows us to be able to not only be at peace with ourselves, but to radiate peace to the rest of the world. You see, if we can radiate our peaceful energy, hopefully that will touch somebody else and they can begin to radiate their peaceful energy. And that's what we want. So no matter what happens on Tuesday, after the elections, there's going to be some disappointments. There's going to be some rejoicing. There's going to be some people that are going to say, oh no, I should have voted. But by then it's too late. But hopefully, whatever happens on Tuesday, we can be at peace with ourselves, knowing that even though there are things that I can't control everything, and I can't control what other people do. What I can do is control how I react to the overall stimulus from the outside that is touching my deeper inner feelings that belong to me.
Thank you, Ronnie.